All right. Hello, everybody. Hello.
Good morning.
Welcome. Oh, we just got a few more coming in. Make sure they are added. Welcome to My Jewish Learning, Daf Yomi, Week in Review, Thursday morning edition. We have I'm Rachel Scheinerman, and this morning we are joined by Rabbi Elliot Goldberg.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. It's good to see you all. As I was thinking about what to share this week, I thought about one of the names. Sometimes we call this session the Week in Review. Sometimes we call it the highlights of the week. And this week I thought about highlights of the week in my frame. And I said, which passage from this week made me the most happy? So the first half of today will be the passage that made me the most happy. The second half is the frame for me was the most famous passage of the week. So we have a passage this week that I think is, of everything we read, the most famous. So we're going to have the first half and then halftime and then second half. If you've been watching a lot of World Cup, that's how my viewing goes recently. And I actually thought, speaking of World Cup, it's a good introduction to the text we're going to start with. Because I thought about, like, what if I were to say, football is konam for me, and I am not going to watch any football. Here in America, that means if I said that with intention to actually make a vow, that would mean I couldn't watch any American football. But if I were in France, that would, American football would be fine, but that vow would rid me of my ability to watch the World Cup, which of course the sport we call soccer, the rest of the world pretty much calls football. But that's an illustration of, in fact, a lot of what Masechet Nedarim is about. The language that you use in your vows matters in terms of what your vow's about, but on top of that, the context in which you're in could determine the meaning of the words of your vow. So with that illustrative example about football and soccer, I'm going to share my screen and go to, there we go. And then I'm going to start the slideshow. We're going to go to a text not about football, but we're going to talk a little bit about porridge today. And it wasn't this first line of the text that made me the most happy, but the happy part's coming. At the beginning of chapter 6, we read a Mishnah that says, if one said, cooked food is konam for me, and for that reason I will not taste it, one is prohibited from tasting a loose cooked food, but is permitted to taste a thick one. The rabbis differentiate, first of all, between different types of cooking in this Mishnah, right? There are different verbs associated with cooking, and cooking is different from roasting and boiling. But a cooked food, that is, if you swear off cooked foods in an oath, that means a loose cooked food and not a thick one, right? A thick one that's more like a porridge or a stew. In the language of the Mishnah, or at the time of the Mishnah, thick cooked foods had the different words associated with them, and then people didn't call them cooked food. They called them porridges or stews or something like that. And so an oath, a vow, framed this way, cooked food is konam for me, only applies for loose cooked food, says the Mishnah, but not all cooked food, because thick cooked food doesn't apply. We then turn to the Gemara that teaches us this Mishnah is not in accordance with the custom of the Babylonians. As Rabbi Zeir said, Babylonians are foolish, they eat bread with bread. So there's a little bit to unpack here. So first, the Gemara is noting that the way the Mishnah is phrased, it doesn't work in the context of Babylonia where language and food is different. And it gives Rabbi Zeir an Eretz Israel, Israeli rabbi of the Gemara, a chance to knock his Babylonian colleagues. By the way, if you're interested in insults in the Talmud, Rachel wrote a great piece about that on My Jewish Learning. We can You should check that out. But he gets to give it a little zing. Those foolish Babylonians, we in Israel don't do this, but they eat bread with bread. What does that mean? To the best that we know, because I don't know that I eat bread with bread, but the same way you might take pita and dip it into hummus and eat hummus with bread, it seemed that the Babylonians used bread to eat their porridge, which was a thick cooked food that from Rabbi Zera's perspective, since it was also made by grains, that for him, porridge was bread and bread was bread. And if you used bread, pita, to eat your porridge, you were eating bread with bread, which meant the rules of the Mishnah weren't written exactly for you. And is this opportunity for Rabbi Zera to knock his colleagues in Babylonia for eating bread with bread? Sort of the way we might, in England, they drink warm beer. Sometimes Americans poke fun at that, and maybe vice versa. Here's the same thing with bread and porridge. And that leads to a question. Rabbi Chia said that those fastidious residents of Chuzal in Babylonia were asked, what's the best way to eat porridge? Should wheat porridge be eaten with wheat bread and barley porridge with barley bread? Or perhaps wheat porridge should be eaten with barley bread and barley porridge with wheat bread? So in other words, the question here is, when you're eating bread with bread, do you want to mix your grains? Do you want a multi-grain meal, or do you want to keep your grains separate? Is it important to, if it's wheat porridge, do you use wheat bread or barley porridge, barley bread, or vice versa? You get the point. What's interesting here is Rav Chisda is Babylonian, so he's not in the mocking, right? He's in this culture. He's not mocking like the previous slide. He might be asking, and some of the commentary says that the residents of Chuzal somehow were known for their culinary expertise. I'm not familiar with Chuzal so much. I've never been there, and don't, it's not a town that shows up in the Talmud a lot. But for some reason, those were asked, and this question was there. And one of the reasons why this text, which I framed as a text that makes me happy, one of the reasons why this makes me happy is we know we've had many sugyot, many long discussions in the Gemara where they weigh two different opinions, and the Gemara says teku, where the Gemara says, right, we can't solve this problem, we don't know the answer, not sure what to do. This question is posed. It's a really practical one, and it's not answered. Like, of all things, it brought a smile to my face. I'm not sure why. Of all the sugiyot where the Gemara asks a question and leaves the answer, leaves it open, doesn't give us a hint or an answer or something, we are left hanging. We do not know what the residents of Chuzal have to say for us. Should we mix our grains when we eat porridge with bread or not? It's just an open question, and I wish I could dig into the sources and tell you what the answer is, but this is it, an open-ended question, and in part maybe because of I find myself in the doldrums of Nidarim, this is one of the parts of this text that brought a smile to my face, and it led to a really nice conversation about eating porridge, because not all Babylonians eat porridge with bread. Rabbah, the son of Rav Huna, found Rav Huna eating porridge with his fingers. Oh no! He said to him, why is the master eating with his hands? Like any good student, he wants to know why his teacher is eating porridge with his fingers and not with bread. And Rav Huna said to him, this is what Rav said. Porridge eaten with a finger is tasty, all the more so if it is eaten with 2 fingers, and all the more so with 3. So we have a rabbinic tradition that when you're having your oatmeal, the best way to eat it is with fingers, not with bread. Use your fingers, and the more the merrier. I don't know if this is practical advice, that 1 finger, it's hard to keep the porridge on your finger, and 3 fingers gives you a good scoop, or it just seems to me be more fun to get more fingers involved. But if you're interested in eating your oatmeal in Talmudic fashion, put aside your pita, which you were almost tempted to use, and put aside your silverware. Use your fingers. That's the lesson of this text, which if you could see me on your screen, just talking about it brings that smile to my face. and the few faces of your faces that are on my screen. I see some of those smiles too. But there's more, friends. Rav said to his son Rav Chia, and Rav Huna similarly said to his son Rabba, if you're invited to eat porridge, for such a meal you should travel a distance of a parsec. So if someone says, hey, come over to my house and eat porridge, how far is it worth traveling for porridge? 1 parsec. So is that good? Is that not good? Well, we'll have to see, because the teaching continues. If you're invited to eat ox meat, you should travel up to 3 parsecs. So if someone lives 3 parsecs away and invites you for porridge, that might be too far a distance. It's not worth it. Only 1 parsec. But ox meat may be more of a delicacy, or maybe if you're a vegetarian, maybe it's flipped. But porridge ranks travel of 1 parsec, where ox meat 3. We have to remember too, it's not, they didn't have cars. Traveling for a meal was harder to do. I think a parsec's a little bit of a distance. It's not your neighbor right next door. But porridge ranks. And the good thing is you don't have to bring silverware because you get to eat it with your fingers. Since we have one teaching by these 2 fathers to their sons, we have a second one that brings us back to porridge. Rav said to his son Chia, and Rav Huna similarly said to his son Rabba, you should not spit anything out before your teacher, as this is disrespectful. As a teacher, I'm very happy with this teaching. I'm happy that my, even without maybe knowing this from the Gemara, my students never spit anything out before me. But there's an exception. Don't spit anything out as disrespectful, apart from gourd and porridge, as they are like burning lead wick in the intestines. Not right. I can't imagine burning anything in my intestines, but burning lead wick seems particularly hot and uncomfortable, and therefore spit them out even before King Shapur. King Shapur was a king of the Sasanian dynasty in Persia, where the rabbis of the Talmud lived. So, and you have to be respectful of the king of the empire in whose kingdom you live. But if you ate gourds or porridge and they're not sitting well in your stomach, it's okay to spit them out before your teacher and even the king of the empire. One more porridge story, and then it's halftime, because I'm watching the clock too. I love this one. This I picture both happening when I was in the past, in like a bunk of kids when I was a counselor at Camp Ramah. I can also picture it happening at my own dining room table with my twins. But here it is, 2 highly respected Talmudic rabbis having this moment. Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda dined together, and one of them ate porridge with his fingers, and the other one ate with a fork. So we have one adopting the teaching before that says, use your fingers. And now we're introducing cutlery into the mix. So the one who was eating with the fork said to the other one who was eating with his fingers, for how long will you keep feeding me your filth? Meaning, get your grubby fingers out of the porridge. And the other one who was eating with his fingers said to the one who was eating with the fork, for how long will you keep feeding me your spittle? Meaning, right, you take your fork, you put it in your mouth, and then you put it back in the porridge, right? You're getting saliva into my meal, you're ruining my meal. This does tell us a little bit about some dining habits, right, on our culinary tour of the Talmud, that it seems they're sharing the bowl of porridge, right? It was a shared meal, right? So think about that pita plate the hummus plate that's put in the center of the table, and everyone eats their pita with it. Clearly here, there wasn't a no double dipping rule. And in the double dipping, right, both silverware and fingers have their upsides for eating and downsides for disgusting your partners by either contributing the filth off your hands back into the porridge, or the saliva from your utensils. So again, I said this at the beginning before, it's nice to see that a fond moment of a summer of dinners with 14-year-olds at Camp Ramah, New England is reflected in a story in the Talmud, or a parenting moment with twins trying to share a bowl of something and arguing over it. I love how the Talmud takes snapshots of real life of rabbis, and the conversations are not just about the picayune details about how to formulate vows and what they might mean, but even moments of the best way to eat your porridge, and some what I found as humorous moments. I don't know, maybe Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Huda got into a fight and they had to have a timeout because they couldn't share their porridge well. But I like these snapshots into real life, and I happen to love. I'm not an oatmeal person. I like cream of wheat. That's my porridge of choice. But it makes me think about a lot as I see these. So as I read over this week's pages again in preparation for today, and I thought about what was my highlight. This was the section, because pages like this are a little fewer and farther between in the Nidarim, and I thought I would bring that to us. There we go. That's the end of halftime.
Thank you. I'm going to jump in with a comment on fork because there's some question about that in the comments.
Sure.
But thank you for the 5th century etiquette lesson. Table manners. My mother is not here, but she's horrified. The word hutza with a hey, not a chet, hutza. I just looked it up in Jastro. Seems to mean like a palm branch. So it seems like he was using like the palm leaves, same as you would use in a lulav, as some sort of utensil, either spearing it or scooping it or something, because someone asked, had forks even been invented at this time? That's what a quick look at Jasper suggested.
Nice. Jasper's helpful for that.
Jumping in with that.
And I'm not an Aramaic linguist, so Jasper is a good aid, and there are other sources for that. I went with the translation, right, that we have on Sefaria. I would say a good question about, I know my wife read, there's a book, The History of the Fork, that she listened to on audio. Has nothing to do with Talmud, but if you're interested in forks, actually the development of the fork and how it changed human culture is fascinating, and it's on my to-read list. But that's good. But that's a good piece, and I'm glad. Right, they brought the language here. I don't think fork in our modern sense was in the society there. And Jastrow, right through his research, I guess suggests, right, it was a utensil, but an actual piece of food used as a utensil. Thank you for that. I appreciate that.
Sure. We're getting more comments about pinpointing the precise evolution of the fork. So you guys can check out the comments for other people are contributing their fork.
Part 2, we should have done more about the forks. All right, but we're going to shift gears totally. There's a well-known passage about the life and the story of Rabbi Akiva. So that we're in a different zone, I changed the color of the slides. And it's, I want to look at the story. You should know the stories about Rabbi Akiva are parallel, but they don't always line up, meaning if you put them together, we have multiple stories about similar periods of his life that have different details. This is one of them. And in some ways, it's a Gemara fairy tale where in the Gemara's viewpoint, the end is happily ever after. And at least this rabbi, me, says maybe it's not as happily ever after as the Gemara wants to pitch it as, and that's foreshadowing what we're going to look at a little bit. So Rabbi Akiva became betrothed to the daughter of Bar Kalba Savua. Kalba Savua is a character in the Talmud known for being wealthy. We don't have any details here about Rabbi Akiva, but as we'll see, in his past before his betrothal, we'll see from the story that he's on the opposite end of the wealth spectrum, and that'll become clear in a moment. But when Bar Kalba Savua heard about their betrothal, he took a vow prohibiting her from eating all of his property. That's what locates this story in Masechet Nidarim. Despite this, she went ahead and married Rabbi Akiva. So Rabbi Akiva meets the daughter of a very wealthy person, and they fall in love, decide to get married. The father is not happy with his daughter's choice of a husband and more or less disowns her, right, with a vow. Sticks the story in Masechet Nidarim. And they then have to live a life without any of his property being available to his daughter and son-in-law. Oh, there we go. And here's what that meant for them. In the winter, they would sleep in a storehouse of straw, and Rabbi Akiva would gather strands of straw from her hair. I can picture this image in this cold storehouse, and they're sleeping there, and what Rabbi Akiva would do is like pick out the straw that got into the hair of his wife. And he said to her, if I had the means, I would place on your head a Jerusalem of gold, a type of crown. If you remember back from Masechet Shabbat, a long time ago on the Daf Yomi cycle, there was a conversation there of could you wear a Jerusalem of gold on your head as an adornment when you go out into the streets on Shabbat? It seems to be some fancy gold headpiece that looks like the walls of Jerusalem or the buildings of Jerusalem. But Rabbi Akiva is saying, I wish I didn't have to pick out straw from your head. I wish I had the means to, give you the finest of jewelry. And what happens? There's a little anecdote about what happens while they're living in this poor storehouse of straw. Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet, comes and appears to them, but as a regular person, so they don't know it's him. And he started calling and knocking at the door, and he says, give me a bit of straw, as my wife gave birth and I don't have anything on which to lay her. But Eliyahu Hanavi poses as a poor person and says, I need some of your straw. My wife gave birth and we don't have anything. And Rabbi Akiva says to his wife, see this man who does not even have straw, right? Sort of saying, you think we have it bad. Here's someone, we at least have straw. This person has it worse than us. There's a zoom in here to these two snippets of their lives. So they're denied the wealth that Akiva's wife's family had. But there's a loving moment of them sitting together as a couple, and a moment that shows that they have gratitude for what they have, even though it's not much. And maybe even there's some implication here that they share the straw. The story continues. It's a little disjointed, but there are different, zooming in, zooming out. She said to him, go and be a student of Torah. So they're living in this place, and she says, right, you go study Torah, Akiva. He went and studied Torah for 12 years before Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua. So she sends him off to study Torah, and he goes, and he's there for 12 years. And as we'll see the very next line, at the completion of the 12 years, he was coming home. So just want to state here that this is one of the stories in the genre about rabbis going off to the shiva to study Torah, leaving their home and not returning. Right? So it wasn't that I just sent my kids off to college, they're about to come home for winter break. This seems to imply he went off for 12 years and did not return home. So at the completion of the 12 years, when he was coming home, Akiva hears from behind his house, a wicked person, says the narrator of the story, saying to his wife, your father behaved well towards you, but it was good that he disowned you. One reason is that your husband is not similar to you, meaning, right, he wasn't a good match. And furthermore, he left you in widowhood in his lifetime all these years. Right? The person is saying, it's good your father disowned you. You made a bad choice marrying this bum. He's not of your station. And look what happened. He went off and abandoned you for 12 years. It's as if you're a widow, right? You have no husband. He's been away. Your father was right to disapprove of this marriage. How does she respond? She says to the wicked person, if he listens to me, he meaning her husband, Akiva, he should stay there another 12 years. Now, Rabbi Akiva said, he hears this, remember, from behind the house, since she has given me permission, I will go back. He turned his back and went to the study hall, and he was there for another 12 years. This is when, for me, the story starts to turn a little bit. Well, it started a little before, but what does Akiva do? He hears this from behind the house, and he turns his back and goes back to the study hall. What I'm missing here is he doesn't even go in and say hi and spend the night. He turns around immediately and goes back for the next 12 years based on overhearing his wife say this statement. Eventually, he comes back accompanied by 24,000 pairs of students. Notice he's gone for 24 years, and he acquires 24,000 pairs of students. That's probably meant to be a lot, but it's right a literary reference connecting the numbers together. And everyone from the town goes out to greet him as he returns 24 years later with 24,000 pairs of students. And his wife too, arose to go out to greet him. For time's sake, which I'm glad I did, I skipped over a side conversation between her and the wicked person comes back to give her a hard time. But we'll skip over that. You could go back and read it if you're interested. But she comes to present herself before Rabbi Akiva, and the sages tried to fend her off. Right? She goes to greet her husband, and the sages who are around him say, right, don't let her, right? Who's this woman trying to get to our Rabbi Akiva? Shoo, shoo, shoo. He looks up and sees her and recognizes her and he says to them, leave her. Both my Torah knowledge and yours are hers. Right? He gives credit to her. Everything I learned in Torah and everything I've taught to you as your teacher are because of her. When Bar Kalba Savua heard the famous man was his son-in-law, right? Kalba Savua is in town. He hears a famous man is his son-in-law. He comes before the halachic authorities and tries to get his vow disowning or denying his daughter his property dissolved, and they dissolve it for him. So the happy ever after here, I think, in the Talmud story is, see, by the merit of Bar Kalba Savua's daughter, Rabbi Akiva, got to go off and study and become the great Rabbi Akiva. His Torah and that he has and all that we've learned from him are to her credit. Right? She gets credit for being the source of Torah. And in the end, the father-in-law says, oh, I guess I was wrong. This guy's not a bum. He's a great sage. And he dissolves his vow. And the next line of the Gemara is, right, there's 6 ways that Rabbi Akiva got rich. One of them is, through the money he received in support from Bar Kalba Savua. And then there are other stories about 5 other ways that he got rich, which you could read on. It strikes me that this story in the Talmud, the rabbis want to say, studying Torah is more important than being with your family, even to such an extreme that you could be gone for 24 years. And the second half by an agreement with your spouse based on overhearing what she says to someone on the street as you're returning home after 12. And that somehow, Kalba Savua, found the right, he sees the wrong of his ways and realizes that his son-in-law is a teacher of Torah, and he dissolves his vow and they can go on happily ever after. For me, what's lacking in this story is the zooming in on like the 24 years of solitude of Rabbi Akiva's wife, who's left home alone, right? In widowhood, she doesn't have her husband. She doesn't have her father. It seems since he's not, we don't know from this story if they have children or not. But alone in her home, which is, right, a storehouse for straw. True, she gives him permission to read Torah. To learn Torah, but a tremendous cost. And I'm not sure saying at the end, both my Torah knowledge and yours are hers, makes up for that. And I'm not sure Kalba Savua does tshuva, does repentance fully for his disowning his daughter and her husband, because like 24 years later he turns around, but only because Rabbi Akiva became Rabbi Akiva. Anyways, that's my short little take on that. I do want to say, I looked this up a couple years ago. I recommended these same books. If you're interested in Rabbi Akiva and the stories about him, 2 things. There's Barry Holtz recently wrote a book about the narratives of Rabbi Akiva. It's great, not just because it tells the Talmudic Rabbi Akiva story, but his opening chapter about how to think about Talmudic biographies, right? And how to think of the stories about the rabbis and their lives in the Talmud are more about folklore than history. His opening chapter that lays that out is great. If you've been reading Daf Yomi, we're learning a lot about the rabbis. And Barry Holtz gives us a context to think about what we do with these stories. And the other book here is Yochi Brandis, who's an Israeli novelist. She writes on biblical rabbinic themes and stories. In Hebrew, this book is called Pardes Shel Akiva, Akiva's Orchard. In English, they left out the Akiva part. But it's the story of Rabbi Akiva told through with roots in the Talmud, but Yochi Brandes brings her own spin on it. She's a great author, and as more and more of her works are being translated to English, I get to recommend them more and more and more to the English reading audience. I recommend both of these. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and come back. You can see me in full screen if you have me on full screen. Anyways, now I'm catching my breath. But in terms of this week, we get a famous passage, this Rabbi Akiva piece, which didn't make me as happy as the first half. It's a famous passage that I thought we should look at, but not as happy with the story as like earlier readings in my lifetime. And we spent a little time thinking about porridge. And it's a cold, gray, wintry day in New Jersey. So porridge makes me happy just in general, let alone these stories in the Talmud. Anyways, we're in the waning moments. I know people might have to go. Oh, someone's asking, what does WGF4 mean? I'll tell you, Philip, what that means is I was in a meeting the other day where I had to rename myself, and I forgot to rename myself back for this session. WGF is the Wexner Graduate Fellowship. I got a fellowship to go to rabbinical school, and the alumni community had a meeting yesterday, and they wanted to all name us by which cohort we were in. I was in cohort 4, and I left that label here. So I'm sorry that was just the question that came on the screen. If you asked a much deeper Talmudic question that I didn't see while I was teaching, I apologize that I answered Phil's question about my Zoom name.
Rabbi Goldberg, your talk reminded me that we saw this Rabbi Akiva story recently in Ketubot, which feels like it wasn't that crazy long ago. It was on Ketubot 60. I looked while you were talking. It was on 62b to 63a, and we read about it. But one thing that was not, I didn't have time while moderating here to do a full comparison of the stories, but the straw incident was not in that story at the time. And I remember seeing it back in Ketubot and thinking, I remember this legend about him braiding her hair and picking out the straw and imagining that pretending the straw was gold when it was only just straw. And so now I know where that is.
Oh, yeah. The Ketubot story, I think, comes in the context of stories about rabbis who leave home to study.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And this comes in, the hook here is the vow that the dad took.
Right.
Right. There are a number of stories that what's interesting about the Akiva stories is they weave together different pieces in different places. The Ketubot version's a little different. We have other stories where they're living he's living in a cave before they get married. Right. What's nice about we see them. The stories are sprinkled throughout the Talmud. What I like about Barry Holtz's book that I recommended is his is a treatment of all. He went through and collected them all and brought them together and reads them side by side, and that helps do what you just did, Rachel, which was, I remember this. Can I find the other one?
Yeah.
Where he's able to lay that all out, and he did the research of pulling them all together. So we didn't see it so long ago. But thought it was nice to bring back. I don't know. There's a way in which Ketubot feels, even though it wasn't so long ago. It feels a long time ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nidarim, it's dragging a little bit for me. Although I turned to my calendar and said, we're more than halfway done. We're getting close. But I think Nazir is sort of Ketubot part 2. I'm sorry, Nidarim part 2, because there is a lot there about oaths, even though there's some new stuff as well. Anyways,
right, because the Nazir is a subcategory of vowing.
Yes.
So sort of like Eruvin was a subcategory of Shabbat.
Yes, I do think there's more material about what the rituals connected to being a Nazirite that don't have to do with the vow part, which might give us a change of pace. But that's for the future.
We'll discover it all early next year.
Yes.
All right, we should probably leave it here. We're a few minutes past 10. So thank you, everybody, for the helpful comments and discussion. Thank you, Rabbi Goldberg, for bringing us a little bit of entertainment and validating my choice to make a big pot of oatmeal for my whole family this morning.
There you go. Silverware.
Which, by the way, we ate with spoons, for the record.
Okay.
That's how we do it in our house, except for my 2-year-old, but that's another story. But we'll get him on spoon soon.
More fun.
Okay.
It's more fun with fingers.
Yeah, well,
It's in the Gemara.
okay. All right. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you soon.
Take care.
Bye-bye.